So tonight, let's get started. We started with the throws, and now we move back onto the track, and we go to the sprints, and Coach Andrea Blackett is back with us again tonight. So just a little bit about Coach Blackett. She's now the assistant head coach at Azusa Pacific University after 2017, where she was coaching at UCLA, coaching the sprints and hurdles. She came to Azusa and is now at APU there. She previously coached at her alma mater, Rice University, where she was one of the most successful women's track and field athletes in that program's history. She was a two-time Olympian, competing for Barbados in the 2000 and 2004 Olympic Games during an 11-year professional career. And she made her third Olympic appearance for Barbados by serving as her native country's head coach at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. So we're just delighted that we have a coach of her caliber with us tonight. And her topic is block starts, getting the basics right. So I'm going to turn it over to Coach Blackett now. Andrea?
All righty. Thank you so much, Tim. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So bear with me. I've done presentations on blocks many times, but I've never done one over Zoom. So it's going to be a little bit different to me. So we'll go ahead and get started. So block start protocol called Getting the Basics Right. Okay, so here are the topics we're gonna go over. We're gonna go over the goal of the block start, the basic block setup, principles in play with the block start, effective drills that I use to teach the block start, the execution of the start, and common errors to look for in the block start. All right, so the goal of the block start is to achieve the greatest acceleration possible. You also want your athletes to get a powerful and explosive push off the block. So you want to make sure that your athletes are using the block. You also want to use effective body positions and angles to reach maximum velocity in the most efficient way in the most efficient time. All right. Next, we want to make sure that as coaches that you spend at least a few sessions teaching your athlete to use the blocks correctly. I believe this will pay off greatly if you do that. I noticed whenever I go to high school track meets, one of the most common things I see is athletes not utilizing the blocks correctly. And especially when you're dealing with a 100-meter runner or a 200-meter runner, the block start is so important. So you really want to make sure you spend, even if you spend a little bit of time giving a few tips here or there, it will pay off down the line. You also want to know the amount of information each athlete can handle. You don't want to get too technical. You don't want to give them too many complex cues. You want to keep it simple when you're dealing with high school athletes that are learning blocks for the first time. So just keep it simple, meet them where they are, give them the amount of information that you know they can process and they can handle. Okay, you also want to make sure you adjust the block pedal angles. A lot of times your athletes will tell you that they want to feel comfortable in the blocks or that the block position isn't comfortable for them. You want to make sure you communicate to your athletes that you don't want them to feel comfortable in the blocks. Block setting is not a position where the athlete is going to be in for a long time. And you want to make sure that there's a certain amount of tension involved. So it's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so get the athletes out of thinking that the block start should be comfortable. Okay, you also want to make sure that each block session that you do work with your athletes, that the athletes are focused and they're able to operate in an intentional manner. So you probably don't want to do block starts at the end of a heavy lactate workout or a very intense training session, because the athletes won't be able to be focused and their movements will be sluggish if you're working on blocks, you have to have fresh athletes. They have to be focused and they have to be able to move intentionally. Okay, so let's talk about the basic setup of the blocks. So you want to find the center of your lane using the thumb to middle finger method. Once the center is located, place the front of the block in line with the center of the lane. And then you're going to measure the back block first using 3 of the athlete's feet as a distance. I usually recommend that the athlete measures the back pedal first, because some blocks are a little shorter. And if the block is shorter, you will run out of space. So go ahead and let the athlete measure their back pedal first and then move on to the front pedal. And the basic distance is 2 feet. So this is the basic setup that you want to start with. And then you can start making minor adjustments as you go along, as you see the athlete, how they handle coming out of the blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and play this little clip of video. Let's hope it moves smoothly. And it's going to show an athlete setting up their block. Okay. So there she's got her middle finger and her thumb. She's walking her finger into her thumb. She's located the center of the block. She's going to place the block at her foot. So she found the center of the lane. Now she measures her first pedal first, which is okay because her feet aren't quite as big. But if you have a boy or male athlete with larger feet, he may run out of space. So now she's measuring her back pedal. Okay, so that's a very basic starting point that every athlete should be able to manage, and we can start from there, and then moving forward, you can start making adjustments as needed. Okay, next we're gonna talk about the block setup. So you want the athlete to back into the blocks with the back leg going in first. So the back leg comes out first. So when you're setting yourself up, you want to get the back leg going in first. Then the front leg will follow. Then you want to make sure you're pushing against the block as you get in, as if you were in the set position, and then let your knee rest on the ground. You're going to do the same thing with the front leg, pushing against the blocks as you would in set position, and then let that knee hang. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and play the video so you can see this young lady. She's a short sprinter. Okay, so you can see how she's intentionally backing into the block. She's loading the back leg and then let her knee drop to the ground. She's also pushed against the front pedal. And now she set herself up in the marks position. All right, so you see the position she's in here. Her hands are placed right behind the starting line. You definitely want to make sure your hands don't cross the starting line. Your thumbs should be placed directly below the shoulders. And the reason why I want my athletes to have their thumbs directly below their shoulders is so that they can support their weight in the set position. If their arms are too wide, and I'll show some examples of people who've done this before, when they come up in set, they won't be able to support their weight comfortably. And if you have a starter that holds you for a long time, the athlete will probably fall out of that stance. So you want to make sure the thumbs are below the shoulders, not too wide, so that you can support your weight. So this is the marks position. And you also want to make sure that your neck is completely relaxed. Sometimes you'll have athletes that tend to raise their head up or they have some tension in their neck. You don't want to do that because that creates unnecessary tension in the upper body and the arms won't be able to swing freely as they're coming out and trying to execute their block start. All right, so moving on to the set position. So to achieve the set position, you slowly want to raise your hips with your front knee at about 90 to 110 degrees, and your back knee is 120 to 135 degrees. You don't want your athlete to lean over the line. They should simply be lifting their hips up. There's no need to lean over the line. If they lean over the line, they're not putting their force against the blocks. So simply, if you set yourselves up correctly in the mark position and you have your angles correctly, all you have to do in the set is lift your hips up. You also want to make sure that your athlete has their whole foot placed against the pedals. This is to make sure, and we'll talk about this in one of the slides coming up. You want to make sure if the pedal is here, when you come up and set the athlete, this is the foot, the whole foot should be placed firmly against the pedal when they come up and set. The athlete should be able to feel themselves pushing against the pedal. When the gun goes off, the athlete should have a very big, pronounced arm swing that matches the big first and second strides gained from pushing off the blocks. So here you can see the athlete is probably leaning a little bit too far forward, but the angles you can see 90 to 110 degrees here in the front and 120 to 135. And another key thing we're looking for, we want to make sure that his whole foot is firmly placed against both blocks. Okay, so what are the basic principles that we need to talk to our athletes about? Okay, the first one is force application. You want to make sure your athletes understand the importance of putting force into the ground, being aggressive, and utilizing the blocks to their advantage. They need to know that the goal is to propel themselves out of the blocks in the most efficient and explosive way possible. So that's why, again, the athlete must have their whole foot on the pedal in the set position. I always tell my athletes, if you're gonna push a wall, will you push it with just your fingers or would you push it with your whole palm? And the answer obviously is to get the most force, you want to use your whole palm to push against the wall. So the same principle applies to the blocks. Instead of just having your toes, just a spike plate on the pedal, you want to put your whole foot against the pedal. And you want to be aggressive and you want to be putting some force on that pedal. The next principle that we talk to our athletes about is action and reaction. The athlete must understand that whatever force they put on the blocks is exactly what the block is going to give them back. If they don't put any force or pressure on the blocks, they'll get nothing back and it will be very ineffective block start. So it's all about action and reaction. If you want the block to give you a push, you have to push against the block as well. Okay, we also talk to our athletes about the effective angles for foot placement on the pedals. Now that is something that I allow my athletes to play with in practice. Like I said, repetition is key. So I let them play with the positions of how high or how low they want their angles, the angle of the foot pedal. But the position that we're looking for is always the whole foot on the pedal. Okay, so another thing I talked to my athletes about is the effective angles coming out of the blocks. I always use the analogy of the airplane, not the helicopter. You know, the helicopter always goes straight up and it never gains a whole lot of speed, but the airplane, it stays low. It gradually starts picking up more and more speed, and it has a very good 45-degree angle as it takes off into the sky. Okay, so athletes always want to think about being an airplane and not a helicopter. The next principle is tension in the lower legs. So when we saw the video of the athlete walking back into the blocks and pushing against the blocks, when she put her knee down on the ground, there creates tension in the lower leg. Okay. And what I compare that to is I talk to my athletes about a rubber band. If you have a rubber band in your fingers and you pull it back, you create a whole lot of tension in the band. And that's what it should feel like in your lower calf. So that when you come up in the set position, you're in that stretch position of the rubber band and you're just waiting for the gun to go off to release that rubber band so it can shoot forward. The same principle of how you want to feel shooting out of the blocks. Okay, so here are some drills that I use to teach the body positions that I'm looking for in the blocks. I use long bounding with the emphasis on body being in triple extension and really big arm swing. We push sled. Sometimes those sleds to push are a little heavy, so we'll get a hurdle and we'll put some weight on the hurdle and we'll push the hurdle using that. And that's a good way to teach the concept of pushing out of the blocks. We pull sled. That's another way to get the athlete to feel the right positions. Also, back leg drives against the wall are a good teaching tool to teach the athlete to keep that toe low to the ground as they clear the blocks. Next, I use coach-resisted block starts. A lot of coaches have the bullet belt now, where you have a belt that goes around the athlete's waist. And when they get in the blocks, the coach will pull them slightly when they're in set position, so they get the feeling of having to explode out the box while they have someone pulling on them. A long time ago, I used to use a rubber tubing, and I actually think it's a little bit more effective than the bullet belt because it's one of those rubber tubing, stretchy tubes, and I would put it around the athlete's waist, and I feel like the athlete feels the resistance a lot more with the rubber tubing. But those are just some tools that you could use to get the athlete used to exploding out the blocks. And also I'll put some tape marks on the track for visual aid. So I'll put tape marks down for the first, second, third step so the athlete has an idea of where their steps should be. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. So I decided to have a little fun and I decided to demonstrate some bounding. So here we go. Here's a video. That's bounding, and that's something that probably should be done on grass. The softer surface, the better, especially when athletes are learning. You want to make sure the focus is keeping those toes up and landing with the whole foot on the ground. We've got it in slow motion over here. So big arm swing. Land with your whole foot, drive that knee up as you propel yourself forward. Okay, so here are the knee drives against the wall. This is something pretty simple. You want your athlete in at a 45-degree angle to the wall. Keep the hips nice and straight. Your body should be straight in a line. You should be able to draw a line from your head straight down to your toe. And then the athlete is just going to drive their knee, their back leg, whichever their back leg is in the blocks, they're just going to drive it towards the wall and keep their toe low to the ground like they would when they're clearing the blocks. All right. So execution of the block start. When exiting the blocks, the first steps of the drive phase, the toe should be low to the ground, like we demonstrated in the last video. Your drive phase should be appropriate for the athlete's ability and skill level. So when you have a very young athlete, their drive phase will probably be a lot shorter than a more mature, developed athlete. So you want to make sure that when you're teaching your drive phase, know where your athlete's skill level is and their ability and how long you would want their drive phase to be. Remember, repetition is key. This skill can always be improved upon. There are very few athletes that can say that they've perfected the block start and there's nothing more they can do to learn in it. Your athletes will always be learning something new as they do blocks more and more. And they'll always be able to make more adjustments. The stronger they get, the more they'll have to adjust their pedals, the more sometimes they'll have to give themselves a little bit more space, but it's always something that you have to keep doing repetition to master the skill. The foot placement on the blocks. I can't stress this enough. This is probably one of the biggest things that I notice, especially young athletes missing when it comes to block starts. You'll see them, and this will be the block pedal, and they probably just have their toe on the block. And if they do that, when they come up in set, what's going to happen is when the gun goes off, the first thing the athlete is going to do is their foot is going to go straight to the pedal, and then they're going to push off the block. So you want to make sure you eliminate that step of them hitting the pedal and moving forward. So when they come up in set, their foot should already be there. So there's nowhere for the athlete's foot to go except powerful and leaving the blocks. Because if you have push against the blocks and you've got all this power and there's a gap, you lose the power when you hit the block and go forward. Okay, so another thing we're looking for in the execution of the start, you want to maximize the phases. You want to maximize the reaction. So that's another reason why repetition is key, because you want your athletes to keep working on reacting to the gun. Also, you want to maximize your block clearance. And by block clearance, I mean your athlete is pushing off the block, keeping their toe low to the ground, getting to the ground on that first step. A lot of times you'll have athletes want to cycle their heel. They want their heel to go straight to their butt first instead of going straight to the ground. And again, that's a loss of power because you're losing all the power off the block and it's going to your heel before it hits the ground. You want to get to the ground as quickly as possible. Okay, so we also want to maximize the drive phase, which means, again, you want the athlete to stay low, put force in the ground, and extend that stride, get a nice long stride coming out the blocks. You want to maximize that phase before you move on to the acceleration phase. Okay, so tools and focus points. So sometimes I'll place a chalk mark or tape on the ground 2 to 3.5 feet away from the line. Again, this depends on the athlete's skill level. So if the athlete is very young and not very powerful, 2 feet from the from the start line would be an appropriate position for their first foot to be if they push out the blocks and they keep their toe low to the ground. If you have someone who's a little bit more advanced, a little bit more powerful, anywhere from 3 to 3.5 feet from the line would be a good target point. Okay. Next, the toe drag. I'm sure a lot of you coaches have heard about the infamous toe drag. I, as a coach, I think that the toe drag is a great teaching tool. However, I don't think it should ever be your end goal. The goal of the toe drag is to teach your athlete to keep their toe low to the ground so they get the feeling of their toe being low to the ground. However, if you drag your toe along the ground, it creates a lot of friction. So yes, you do want to teach them that. And if getting them to drag their toe is a good way for them to understand what they're looking for and what it should feel like, that's great. But eventually you want them to move on to the point where they're just keeping the toe low to the ground, but it's not actually dragging along the ground. Next, I use cones for younger female athletes. I'll probably place the cones at about 15 to 18 meters for them to understand where their drive phase should take them. So how long they should be staying low, how long they should be pushing for. For boys, I go 20 to 25 meters for them. If you've got a really advanced athlete, their drive phase can extend to maybe 30 meters even. So make sure that you give them a target for where their head should be down, where they should be pushing before they come up and start their acceleration phase. Okay, again, repetition is key. You got to keep making sure, every time you pick one thing for your athlete to work on and keep repetition so that they can enhance their skill of block starts. The foot placement on the pedals, you can raise them or lower them as you need to, but you got to make sure that the goal is when they come up in the set position, their whole foot is firmly pushing against that pedal. So wherever that angle needs to be for them to hit that position, depending on the strength and flexibility of their ankle, and the mobility in their ankle, and the flexibility of their Achilles, that will depend on where that angle of that pedal needs to be. You also want to focus on great execution of the drive phase. That is probably one of the toughest things you have to teach your athletes, especially your younger athletes in the sport. You've got to teach them to understand that you're looking for the airplane position and not the helicopter position. All right, so common errors for you as coaches to look for. The most common thing, like I said before, is the athlete not using the pedals. You want to make sure that the athlete has their whole foot pushing against the pedal. I can't stress that enough. That is probably the thing that I see high school athletes most not doing. Think about the force application again. You want your whole foot so you can push against the pedal. The more force you have against the pedal, the more the block is going to give you back. Another common error is athletes with their arms too wide. Like I said, you want your thumb below the shoulders so that you can support your weight when you come up in the set position and you can hold it. Another common error is the heel recovery. The athlete, as they come out the blocks, their instinct is to be up and running. So the first thing they do is they let their heel recover and their heel comes to their butt instead of their toe sweeping the ground, going as low to the ground as possible. You definitely want to make sure the athlete understands that the drive phase is a slow, deliberate process. A lot of times athletes want to feel fast, but they don't understand that when you're driving, it is a long, slow, powerful process. So it may not feel fast, but you're covering more ground and you're putting more forces into the ground. Another common error is no drive phase, and the athlete is doing a helicopter start and they're popping up a lot. A lot of coaches use the term popping up, which means that they're not driving, they're not keeping their arms nice and long, they're just getting up into a running position really quickly. And so they've wasted their time in the blocks. Poor or ineffective angles. You want to make sure, like we talked about before, the 90 to 110 degrees in the front, 130 degrees in the back, 120 to 135 degrees for the back leg. A lot of times you'll see athletes, they'll raise their hips so high and set that their back leg is almost 180 degrees from the ground. That's not a good position to push off. So you've got to look for those angles. And again, like I said, impatience and rush to max velocity. Athletes have to understand the drive phase is a very slow process that requires patience. You have to be patient. It's going to feel slow when you first start because your stride is longer. You're not getting down on the ground as quickly as they want to, but you want to be patient and you don't want to rush to max velocity. All right, so which takeoff do you prefer for speed? Like I said, again, the helicopter, it pops straight up, but the airplane, it takes its time, it gathers speed, and it takes off at an angle. So this is an analogy that I often use for my athletes to understand the concept of driving and angles versus popping straight up. All right, so let's look at these two different block starts. We've got the Ben Johnson start over here versus Trayvon Bromell. Both of them were great starters, but again, like I always tell my athletes, yes, Ben Johnson has a very wide stance. His arms are covering the whole lane, but he also weighed almost 300 pounds. So he was strong enough and powerful enough to support that position. But here we have Trayvon Bromell, and as you see, his shoulder is direct, his thumb is directly below his shoulders. He's not leaning over the line. He's in a pretty textbook position right there. So wide arms versus thumbs below the shoulders. Again, we got Ben Johnson here again, covering the whole width of the track. And then I think to his left, that's Linford Christie from Great Britain. And you can see his shoulders right above his thumbs. And I think he was a pretty good starter as well. So you can see the two differences in styles. But I think this one on the right is probably more appropriate for the average athlete. All right, so on your marks, the marks position. One thing that you're looking for, you want the hips directly above the knee and the knee at a right angle to perpendicular to the ground. Okay, so you want to should be able to draw a line directly from the hip down to the knee and from the knee straight across to the ground. So that's just one thing that you want to look for in the marks position. His thumb should be directly above the shoulder. I think his shoulders are leaning a little bit too far forward here. But I like his neck position. You want to be completely relaxed. You don't want any tension in the neck. You don't want your athlete looking up. They should be completely relaxed in this position. So this is a pretty good position that you're looking for in the marks. Okay, so I love looking at stock photos online because you can always find some interesting things. I don't even understand how she even got into this position. As you can see, her toe is pointed down. She does have a pretty good arm swing. I have no idea how she even got her torso in that position. She's probably a dancer or a gymnast. Um, and as you can see, also see how close her blocks are together. That's not efficient. But then if you look at this picture here, you can see this spacing between his blocks are probably about a foot. He's got his toes pointed up, knee toe low to the ground as he drives forward. You could probably draw a straight line from his ankle straight through his head. He's got a nice big arm swing here, big arm swing in the front. Yeah, it's just a pretty good position on the blocks, off the blocks for him. All right, so here's another stock photo. I don't even know what race he's running. He's in lane 7 with starting blocks on the outside at the finish line, but here we go. See, his blocks are so close together he can't get good angles. Shoulders too far back. You want your shoulders above the knee. And then you can see his head placement. If the athlete is looking up like this, chances are when they come out of the blocks, they're going to pop straight up like a helicopter. There's nowhere else for them to go but up if your head is there. I always encourage my athletes to keep their heads down and relax so that their legs can control their process and not the head. Because when your head is up like that, your head wants to be in charge. Okay, so we can look over here at this athlete and you can see there's a line straight from his head, straight through his torso. His hips probably could be a little bit higher here, so the line can go straight through his hips. But again, the angles are good, 90 to 110 degrees in the front, 120 to 135 in the back. And you can see, if you zoom in, you can see his whole foot is against both pedals. So he's in a good position to execute and push off the blocks. Okay, so here we're gonna see a slow motion, a start in slow motion. Uh-oh, sorry. Okay, this is a hurdler, so she's gonna get up pretty quickly to get into the blocks. But you can see big arm swing. She's driving, putting force in the ground. Of course, her drive phase is a little short because it's only 8 steps to the hurdle. So take a look again. She keeps that toe low to the ground. She probably recovers a little bit too much on the second step. She didn't keep that toe low to the ground. But you can see how she attacks. She's aggressive. She drives out and she attacks that hurdle. All right, so now we got a, oops, sorry. Full speed start. She's pushing back, nice and firm into the blocks. Knee down. She's got her thumbs below her shoulders. She's setting herself up. Hips up. Okay, so one thing I would say on that start, she probably had her hips up a little too high. Take a look again. But she had a big swing and she's a super powerful athlete. So you can see how she really pushed off the blocks and put her force put some force into the ground with a big arm swing. All right, well, that's the end of my presentation. I'll turn it back over to you, Tim. As you can see, I've got my email address and my contact information if you would like to reach out to me. I'd be happy to answer any more questions, but I will stick around, and if you have any questions, I am here.
Outstanding. Let me just start with this, because leave that up on the screen for just a moment before you quit sharing your screen, because the email address. And when somebody like Coach Blackett says that, she'd love to talk to you, or you can, these folks mean it. And that's one of the great things about the sport, at the highest level. Andrea's been to 3 Olympic Games, and she's a coach at a major university. And you think, well, gosh, she doesn't want to talk to me about my girl I'm trying to get to break 14 seconds for the 100 meters. But yes, she does. And she's sincere about that. And all these folks are. And I don't care, Nick Garcia was here earlier, and it doesn't matter who you are. You go up to one of those folks at a meet and sit down and say, can I talk? And you know what? After a while, you're going to have to say to Coach Blackett, can I leave now? I mean, that's enough, and she's going to want to keep talking to you. So take advantage of that. A couple of people have asked actually questions. Can I contact you? And yes, they can. And if they can, would you send them your PowerPoint presentation from tonight? Would that be okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. All right, why don't you stop sharing your screen for a minute, and we have a few minutes for some questions, and we'll do that, and everybody can see a little bit better. So just up at the top.
All right, there we go.
Wonderful. Okay. All right, so here's some good questions for you. Here we had several that came up. What was interesting is a lot of people asked questions, and then you answered it, because they said that, and so I got a lot of questions saying, never mind, but here you go. How do you decide which foot go back and which foot in the front?
So I go with the old school method. I turn the athlete away from me, distract them, then I just give them a gentle tap on their back, and whichever leg naturally falls forward, that's usually the best foot for them. Of course, hurdlers sometimes have to switch sides depending on their stronger lead leg. But yeah, that's typically it. But it's usually the athlete's stronger leg will go in the back.
Okay. Here's a good one here from, there's Coach Gardner here. In the case of the athletes leaning over the line, is this a sign to move the blocks back?
No, I would say that's just a sign of them not feeling the block. They're not putting any pressure on the pedal. They really just, all they need to be doing. So if you set the position and the angle's up correctly in the marks position, all you have to do in the set position is lift your hips. So remember in that video where I showed the hips were directly above the knee and it was a 90-degree angle? You really want to get that position set correctly in marks so that in set, there should be no leaning. It should be just raising of the hips so that the athlete can feel the blocks. Because if they're leaning forward over the line, they can't feel the blocks. And you want to, again, please make sure the athlete's whole foot is against that pedal.
Excellent. All right. How long should the first strides be for a high school male athlete?
So for a high school male athlete, I would say the first step should be about 2.5 to 3 feet from the line. So that means it should be about 6 feet, maybe 5 to 6 feet. And then the second step should be a little bit longer than that. And of course, as you progress, it gets longer.
Okay, there were several questions regarding the drive phase. Let's start with this one. How long is the drive phase?
Right. So for younger athletes who aren't very strong, aren't very powerful, I mean, for example, I have an 800-meter runner. Her drive phase is probably about 15 meters max because she's not putting a lot of force in the ground. She doesn't have a great stride length. But as the athlete progresses and gets stronger, gets more powerful, gets in the weight room, the drive phase will extend. So I would say right now, my shortest drive phase that in my group is probably about 15 to 20 meters. my longest with my male sprinters who are very strong. They're probably almost at about 30 meters. So you just have to, look, you can tell when your athlete is tapped out. So you want to make sure you give them a good target. So for the younger ladies, I would say 15 to 20 meters. And then as the skill level progresses, you probably can get out to about 30 meters or longer.
All right, let's stay with those drive phase questions. Here's what do you tell your athletes about their breathing on drive phase coming out of the blocks?
Yeah, so I don't spend too much time focusing on breathing because I feel like it's just throwing another thing in there for them to think about, for them to get confused with. But definitely, they want to get a big deep breath in as they come up and set, and when the gun goes off and their arms swing, they let that air out. But yeah, sometimes it's best not to get too complicated with them.
Okay, here's another one related to that. How long does the athlete keep his head down?
Okay, so your head should be down through the drive phase. So again, anywhere from 15 to 30 meters, depending on the athlete's development. But what you want to make sure you focus on is making sure that the head coming up is gradual. Again, always give that airplane analogy. You want everything to be gradual. You don't want them to say, oh, I'm at 25 meters. This is my drive phase. Time to get up and running. It should be a gradual process. But again, like I said, I put that cone down where I think is a good drive phase for them, and so that they can keep their head down and run through that cone. And one thing I always tell them, when you feel like it's time to come up, try to hold on to it for 2 more strides. And that's a good way of judging when it should be time to come up.
Very good. All right, here's this a little bit long one. So let me go through the whole thing here. It says, I've seen it to be taught to lean forward in the blocks, to have a feeling of falling in order to help prevent athletes from popping up right away. What do you do instead of to prevent athletes from popping up right away?
Yeah, so I don't like that leaning over the line and set for me, because I find if you're leaning forward, you can't be putting pressure on the blocks. And the most important thing is to have that pressure on the blocks so that whatever you're giving the block is going to give you back. And what I teach them to keep their head down is when they come up and set, I want them looking at their thigh. And then I always tell them, your legs need to be in control of the situation, not your head. Always let your legs guide the process. Because if your head is guiding the process, the head is going to want to look up and start looking down the track. So while you're in your drive phase, you should be looking, while you're in the blocks, you should be looking at your thigh. And as you swing your arms out, you should keep your head looking down.
Okay. This says, would you please go over force application one more time?
Force application, yes. So you want the athlete to understand that when they're coming out of the blocks, block execution is a powerful, explosive, aggressive movement. So whatever force you're putting into the block, whatever force you put into the ground is going to give you back. So it's, again, action and reaction. So you want to make sure the athlete understands you want to be aggressive and push off the blocks. You want to be aggressive and push off the ground, especially in that drive phase, so that you will get that force propelling you forward.
Well, that leads to another good one here. Any tips or audio cues to teach arm swing?
Ooh. Yeah, I can't think of any audio cues. But one thing we do is sometimes we'll have the athletes kneeling in the marks position, and I'll blow the whistle, and I just let them swing those arms and feel that fall. But you definitely want them nice big arms to match and you want them to think about, your first steps out the blocks are nice and long. So your arm swing should be matching your foot stride.
That's a good one there. All right, here's some good question just to kind of clear some things up. Somebody on your bounding step, what is long bounding?
Okay, so there's quick bounding where the focus is hitting the ground and coming off quick. Okay, and you'll probably do that for 20, 30 meters. And the goal is just to hit the ground, bounce off, and be dynamic off the ground. Long bounding, your foot is staying a little longer on the ground, and the focus is the arm swing and the triple extension. So it's just slightly different goals. So the long bounding, the focus is force into the ground, big arm swing, versus quick bounding, which is more about being dynamic and being bouncy off the ground.
That's good. You said triple extension because that was the other half of the question. What exactly is triple extension?
Okay, so the triple extension is big extension in the arms and the shoulder joint, big extension in the hip joint, and extension in the ankle. So all three joints are fully extended. As you saw on the video, when you get a chance to look at the video again, if you look at the slow motion version, you'll see there's a point where the arms are wide, the hip is extended, and the ankle is extended all at the same time.
Very good. That was good. All right. How often do you practice blocks?
Typically twice a week. Yeah, I try to spend as much time as I can on it because, like I said, especially for athletes that are young, a lot of the freshmen, they come with pretty, I don't want to say bad, but they've come with some habits that we really have to correct. So we try to spend as much time as we can, at least twice a week. And like I said, try to do block starts at the beginning of the session. Don't wait until the athletes are tired and fatigued to go and do blocks because, again, it's an explosive movement. You have to be intentional with your movement, so you can't do it on dead legs. So try to get it out the way first thing.
All right, we're approaching 9 o'clock, so here, let's end on this one. This is a good one. Is there ever a case where a young athlete should not use blocks? I assume they mean as a sprinter, so.
Right. Well, I mean, if the athlete hasn't practiced blocks and doesn't know how to use blocks, it's not necessarily worth it. Like I said, I see a lot of athletes that, they have the blocks and they only have their toes on the blocks. They're not pushing off the blocks. I mean, if the athlete's not pushing off the block, it doesn't make sense for them to use it. So I think it's just important, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, spend some time teaching their athlete how to use the blocks. If you can give them 2 or 3 important cues, which I would say is shoulders above their thumbs. You want their hips above their knees in the set position. Just lift their hips in the marks position. Sorry, you want your hips above your knees in the marks position. Just lift your hips and then pushing off the blocks. If you just give them those 3 steps for them to work on, it's better than nothing. And then you can get more complex as you have more time. But I mean, if the athlete isn't using the blocks at all, you don't have to use them. But the goal is you should be able to get your athletes once to the line with some knowledge of using the blocks.
All right, that's a great place to stop. Andrea, thank you so much. Another
You're
outstanding
welcome.
presentation, an hour on the blocks, but boy, it's important. So thank you so much. Really do appreciate it. And again, if you'd like to email Andrea, by all means, she would share that information. And if you see her track meet, go say hello. So thank you. It's another good night. We'd like to remind you, we'll be back tomorrow night. And tomorrow night, we stay with field events and our first pole vault session. We have pole vault 101 with Estelle Nieto, who's the coach at Cal State Fullerton. And then Olympian Doug Nordquist coming back with the high jump, 3.5 things that matter in the high jump. So you better show up tomorrow night. And again, so thank you, Andrea, and to everybody else, good night. We hope to see you tomorrow night.
All right. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
As the last comment from here is so nice to see Coach Blackett, Vanessa from Skits. So I don't know if you know her. There you go. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.